Hey friends, welcome to Bokeh, a podcast exploring the ever-blurring lines between the personal and business lives of professional photographers. This is your host, Nathan Holritz, and I'm happy that you can join me in connecting with photographers and entrepreneurs as we discuss photography, business, and that sometimes messy thing we call life. This podcast is brought to you by Milu, the simplest way for photographers and coordinators to collaborate on shot lists and timelines for weddings, parties, and other amazing events. Visit Milu, MIILU.com. This podcast is also brought to you by Photographers Edit, custom image editing for the professional photographer. Visit photographersedit.com. All right, Bokeh Podcast listeners, we are back, and I'm going to try to exude a warm, sunny day because it's actually kind of cloudy and rainy where I'm at the moment. I am joined by a brand new guest, and I'm going to make sure that I don't butcher your name, Janioris Diaz Rodriguez. Did I get that right?
You got it.
I'm close,
proud of you.
Okay.
That's good.
And I have to say right off the bat, I already told Janioris this. She has got the best radio voice, and not only that, her husband is actually an audio specialist, and so we're going to have some of the best audio on a podcast episode that we've had to date. So thank you for that extra little bonus.
He'll be happy to hear that. Thank you.
Oh, that's great. Well, I want to dive right in, and let's talk about, well, first of all, I'll just kind of give everybody a little bit of a teaser. We're going to actually talk about how to create a multifaceted life. Now, there is... it's very easy as business owners. I know that I'm not a great multitasker. I have to kind of push myself to break out of my box and out of my normal rhythm. And I think it's a good thing. I think it's a healthy thing. It challenges us, and we'll get into that in more detail. But today we're going to talk about how to create a multifaceted life. We'll get to that segment of the conversation in just a little bit. But to begin with, Janioris, talk to me a little bit about your businesses, your photography business's brand position. What market are you currently in?
So I identify as a portrait photographer. So I specialize primarily in families, but my passion project is boudoir right now. Really?
Okay. So, and what market are you based in currently?
Oh, I am in Deltona, Florida. So it's a very small town on the outskirts of Daytona Beach, about an hour of Orlando.
And the main reason that I asked this question is to kind of give, I need to do a better job, I think, still of introducing our guests, giving a little bit of context to experience and where you're at in the U.S. market. But it also helps to understand what market you're in, because this idea of brand position matters for the sake of distinction, right? But why does it matter to have a brand position? If you just say you're a portrait photographer or you're a wedding photographer, for our listeners, this is why we spend so much time here, is those words are a dime a dozen these days. There's so many photographers out there. And so having a distinct brand position, not only what service you offer, ideally it's a unique service, but if it's not necessarily a unique service, then the way that you offer that service hopefully will be unique. And then being able to effectively communicate that is really important. So I'm actually looking at your Instagram profile right now, Janioris, and it says creating profoundly personal connections with people that want to leave a legacy. That seems like kind of a combination of a brand position and a mission statement. Can you give context to it?
Sure. So I like to say that I'm a recovering perfectionist. So I help people preserve their stories through photography as both a masterpiece and a work in progress at the same time.
Okay.
I achieve that through a personalized co-creation experience. So the way to create that experience is in a way that is creating those profoundly personal connections with people so that you understand what's important to them and how they want to preserve their story as a legacy or as an heirloom, a keepsake to pass on to people.
Huh. Wow. Okay. So how do you effectively communicate that? Because I'm looking at your website as well, and you very briefly and concisely and wonderfully really sum it up on the homepage of your website. Again, something that I've encouraged our listeners to do when it comes to this idea of brand position. But you say, I am a portrait photographer telling the stories of people who want to leave a legacy through a personalized co-creation experience. Summed up wonderfully, and I love that that's front and center. But how beyond that? If I look at that as a photographer and somebody who's had lots of conversation about brand position, I can get it. For somebody who doesn't, who maybe has never really even had a professional photography experience before, how do you effectively communicate that to a potential client?
That's great. And I thank you for that. So Primarily, when people think of legacy, I serve a market that is primarily Hispanics. There's a lot of Hispanic population here in Deltona and the surrounding areas. And people really understand the concept of legacy here and what they're passing on. They're very family-oriented people. And so when we talk about something that you can pass along, they grasp that. They understand what it means to pass on a legacy or something that matters to the next generation of your family.
Yeah.
And it's also, if you think about it, back in history, when you had these portraits of people, even in paintings, they wanted to present themselves in a way that would be preserved for the rest of history and the way they wanted to see themselves. We know from history that those portraits weren't always accurate because they wanted to present themselves in a certain way. And so we talk about it in a way of how do we preserve your story in a masterful way, in a way that you can be proud of, but that is also part of the work in progress of what's really happening now. So the only way to pass on a legacy is for it to be true and real to your story and to your life. And so we talk about it in sense of, especially because I do a lot of family sessions, we talk about it in light of how do you want to preserve this very moment of what's happening in your family history and also pass it along in a way that will communicate legacy to your future generation.
Do you think that there is I think about American culture versus Hispanic culture, and I don't want to oversimplify this conversation, but I think about the significance of family and Hispanic culture versus American culture. I think of American culture as one of that kind of centers around this idea of independence versus a Hispanic culture, which seems to put more emphasis on the family unit. Am I off there? Is that too simplistic or stereotypical?
No, I completely agree. It might be stereotypical, but it's kind of a true stereotype. I think it's true. There is a lot of dependency and a lot of people who function as a unit when it comes to the Hispanic culture. We do interrelate and are interdependent with one another. We stay close together, live close together, depend on each other, even for events or weddings or things like that. You will see how the family sort of pitches in like a collective village constantly when it comes to raising children, when it comes to putting on events. Yeah. When it comes to anything, they function as a unit, as a village. So yes, you can definitely see that.
I think that's a beautiful thing. Many of our listeners know I grew up in Japan, spent about 10 years there. And so I've had the opportunity to be, I feel like I'm, part Japanese almost in a different culture and see the difference, the distinct difference between the Japanese culture and the American culture. And I think it's beautiful to continue to learn about more cultures. And I love the focus on family. I think it's something that I crave, honestly. Like one of the things, and this is totally random, but one of the things that I've never quite understood is this distinction that's created between, when you have a married couple, between each side of the family. Like in my mind, a really great Christmas or Thanksgiving get together would be like all sides of the family, everybody coming together into one big happy family and spending time together. Like that's a beautiful thing to me. And for some reason in our culture, that doesn't seem to be the norm.
Yeah, that's true. I have to say, I grew up far from my family, so I'm only really close to my immediate family. Pretty much my family has been my extended family from church and everything like that. But I can understand where you're coming from in wanting to gather I'm a newlywed and I see the distinction between different families and when we come together and that it takes a lot of process of intentionality to merge together and become one.
Yeah.
Not just as a couple, but merging families. And it takes leveling with people. It takes a lot of ebb and flow. It takes really understanding people's background, their context, their history. And I'm a psychology nerd, so I love that. And I love diving into what makes people tick and react. But that's so important when you're trying to create unity or a sense of village. You need to understand that there is a world behind every person in a family.
That's so true. I know. Yeah. I'm way too simplistic at times. I just wish everybody could get along and we could all be happy. And I know that there's a lot more nuance to the whole conversation. You mentioned being a perfectionist, and maybe this will kind of give further context to our conversation today and help our listeners get to know you a little bit more. But I know that you mentioned to me before we started recording that your parents are pastors. So you come from a ministry background, a lot of time in church. Same thing for me. My parents, missionaries. I grew up as a missionaries kid, spent a lot of time in church as well. And perfectionism, frankly has eaten me alive at times, or the sense of a need for perfection on multiple levels. And it's a much deeper conversation we don't have time for today. But I wonder if you feel like some of that perfectionism comes from your time in the church.
That is an excellent observation. Well, actually, I would venture to say that my perfectionism has at times conflicted with the reality of the church. So the reality of the church, and not just the church, but gospel and what I believe in Christianity, is actually that you can't be perfect and that you can't do it all right. And so that you need a savior. That the
Sure.
fact that there is the fine line between living in grace and living with discipline. And so somewhere, if you teeter on either side of those for too long, you will find yourself if you teeter on the side of discipline for too long, you will find yourself where I have found myself often in venturing to try to reach perfectionism. If you teeter on the side of grace for too long, you start to find yourself in a bit of rebellion. So it's almost like a balance that's actually been contrasted in the church. It's been the constant realization that God doesn't expect me to be perfect, that I don't need to be, and that I can live in grace, that grace gives me freedom, that I don't have to, there's actually not a checklist for me anymore after having accepted Christ. That's my belief system.
Sure.
So I don't need that checklist anymore. And yet I submit to it often. And I think, my father is an excellent driven man. I've learned a lot of excellent things from him. And part of it is just that he has a statement that says, I'm going to say it in Spanish first, las cosas se hacen bien o no se hacen, which is things are done well or they're not done at all. So
interesting.
He's a man of excellence and of giving the very best. But I've never felt a pressure, not from my family nor from the church, to try to live up to a certain perfect standard. I think if anything, I've placed that on myself over time. I think it's almost like, if I could, it's almost like I don't want to not let God down. How do I say this? It's almost like I don't want to embarrass God if he could be embarrassed. It's almost like I have to defend him and he needs no defending. So I feel like sometimes, especially as a minister's daughter, as a pastor's daughter, there's a lot of stereotypes that come from that and people's expectations for what pastors' kids should look like or would look like based on life experiences. So I've either spent a lot of time battling against those stereotypes or trying not to embarrass God with my actions, but I'm constantly found back on the lap of grace of understanding that I don't have a checklist that I need to make it, to measure up. So it's actually been a contrast in the church. The church is the reason why I can remember I don't have to be perfect.
Well, yeah, I think we all at this point realize the church isn't perfect, but I know how that life, for me at this point, a past life, but that life had such a distinct effect on me. And it wasn't just about the church. It certainly had to do with family life as well. But that sense of a need for perfection, things being just so, is something that, again, on multiple levels, I'm still kind of pushing through. And I wonder, normally this is where I would ask about the most important lesson or one of the most important lessons that you've learned as a business owner so far. But I want to shift the question a little bit and get your take on perfectionism as a business owner. How maybe how you've seen that get in the way of being an effective business owner and how you've been able to push beyond that.
Absolutely gets in the way constantly. I have to fight myself constantly. In fact, I've been just to give a little bit of context, I've been photographing since I was in high school back in my darkroom days. So I'm not new to photography, and yet I am new to this business. I've only been in business for a year, part-time as of now. So I think a good chunk of why I haven't ventured in that area is because I want everything to be perfect first before launching. Before doing anything, it needs to be just right. And my website has to be perfect SEO and email list and IPS, social media platforms, algorithms, passive income. I mean, there is not a shortage of information out there, advice and techniques available to emulate from people at different levels of business. So if you're not careful, and I'm sure many people listening can relate to this, that will stifle your growth and it will paralyze you indefinitely until you can truly realize that there are certain things that you learn as you step, as you walk, and you need to be able to learn from every person, and everyone knows something you don't know, but realize, discern when it's time, when you're ready to apply what you've learned, if you should apply it at all to your specific business model.
Yeah, well, and it reminds me of a conversation I think I maybe alluded to on the podcast not too long ago, but I was having a conversation with my son about his next steps. He's coming up on he's in his senior year now. He's going to be going to college here pretty soon to study music, and he was trying to figure out how to go about this process and make some choices about the school and so forth. And one of the things that I encouraged him was really kind of preaching to myself as well, reminding him that you can go ahead and make a move, and if you need be, later on you can course correct. But the idea that we have to have it all figured out and just so to begin with, it really can be inhibitive of us being able to first get started, and then secondly, get our brand out there and begin to grow, because we have this preconceived idea that we have to be this particular thing in order to launch and then to be successful. And I have to remind myself of this. I'm in the process right now of getting ready to launch a new brand. And, things keep coming to mind that, hey, maybe we should add this feature or do this thing. And I have to remember, okay, we need to get it out there. It doesn't have to be just perfect when we get it out there. We can always make adjustments later on. And I think that's a good reminder for all of us. So I really appreciate you sharing that reminder and that encouragement as well. At the end of the day, we just need to do it. And by the way, I have to mention, you talk about just having gotten started. You have lovely, lovely work on your Instagram. And for those of you listening in, if you go to Janioris DR, so it's JANIORISDR, and of course, we'll link to this in the show notes at bokehpodcast.com. You can see Janioris's work, and it's quite lovely and varying too. The mix of color and black and white is really nice.
Thank you so much. I am a fan of grayscale, so I do slip it in there as much as possible. It's part of the brand. I guess I say I love taking photos in grayscale and learning from those crowned in gray hair. So I say that a lot. So there's definitely a lot of black and white on there, but I appreciate that compliment. I guess my virtual mentor is Jasmine Starr. She's phenomenal. And she always says, the market will tell you, put it out there and the market will tell you what things you need to correct and change, So I definitely feel like I put things out and I listen and I observe from the market and make adjustments accordingly. But I definitely like to put it out there. At least now I'm learning to start putting things out there, even if they're not perfect.
Well, but you bring up a good point, though. This idea that we need to pay attention to the market is a really great reminder, because it's easy as photographers and entrepreneurs to say, hey, this is the business, this is the brand, this is the art that I'm going to create. And there's some significance to that. And especially going back to our earlier conversation, if we're going to create a distinct brand position, we need to bring something unusual to bear. But we also have to pay attention to what people are saying and how the market's responding to what you're offering. And that is so, so important. So yes, I'm glad that you bring that up as well. You can course correct.
There are iterations. I'm sorry to interrupt you. There are iterations too of your own desire to put out a certain image or a certain style. You change too. You to reserve the right to evolve and change as a person as well. So you don't have to commit to everything you put out. You can evolve as a business owner and change your perspective and change what you want to accomplish through your brand.
Yeah. And that's also a great reminder too. Great point. I was listening to a podcast interview with Sean Penn. I have been actually, and it's really interesting. The conversation, he had transitioned or has transitioned largely from movie making to becoming an author and writing, and he really enjoys writing. And Mark Maron, who was interviewing him, kind of continued to push the issue, like, hey, don't you miss movie making? That was your thing. How do you go from that, just drop that all together and go and become an author? But it was a great reminder of the fact that we are human beings who naturally change and iterate, hopefully in some form or fashion, hopefully in a positive manner. We're continuing to learn and to grow. And so what we do as business owners can change, and that's okay. We don't have to be exactly the same forever. So good conversation. Talk to me about free time, especially as a relatively newlywed. How do you balance, and we're going to talk more about how you balance all that you do, but how do you balance certainly being a business owner along with everything else and also being married? How do you make time consistently for the important people in your life?
That I'm glad that you linked that to being married, because I'm privileged to be married, which comes with the intimacy and the vulnerability needed to have a built-in accountability system. So I think that the biggest technique for time for me, especially because of how I'm wired or how I'm built, my personality type, is accountability. And my husband is on the opposite spectrum of me. He values rest much more than I do naturally. He understands pace a lot better than I do sometimes. And so he is definitely the wisest thing that I can do is allow someone the intimate role of keeping me accountable. And so he does that for me. Definitely part of what gives me time or what centers me and tells me, hey, you spend a lot of time doing this, or hey, isn't it time for you to give yourself rest or to care for yourself, or let's get away, let's take a break. He is definitely the voice in my ear that does that for me. And the more time that we spend together and living together, the more I adjust to that rhythm that is healthy for us. And this is particularly true for people who have, I guess people are very familiar with the Enneagram, so I can use that. But I mean, I'm a perfectionist type 1, right? But that's also true for anyone who's high achieving or like a type 3, or people who are people pleasing, type 2s, or people who are very highly responsible, type 6s, or distractible or scatter personalities, type 7s. So really a lot of different kind of personalities that can benefit from having accountability.
Yeah, and we have to kind of set ego aside in order to be open to that kind of accountability too, right? The idea that somebody would, I can almost imagine your husband putting his hands on your shoulders and saying, hey, take a deep breath. It's okay. Slow down a little bit. Just be here with me. Like being open to that kind of feedback in one form or another, it means we set our ego aside and we have to, just open ourselves. And you talked about that idea of vulnerability and it requires a little bit of that. What do you think about that?
Well, I definitely agree with that. And I think that it has to do with who you have given permission to enter in and point to those areas where you need improvement or where you're not living up to the things that you've already communicated are your priorities, or the things that you've already said are your goals, or, these are people that are already on your inside circle, people that you've already trusted to share what your visions and your dreams are for your life. And so I think that it's easier to have accountability when you have given that person permission to enter in and point those places out, people that are for you, that love you, that want to see you succeed. And I think that has a lot to do with it. Who have you given accountability to enter in those places?
Talk to me about an impactful business or self-help book, maybe even a podcast that you've read or listened to that's just made a really big impact on your life. What would you recommend?
Okay, so I am all about podcasts. I work full time still. So photography is my side hustle, if you will. And we'll talk about that more later. So as I work in my cubicle, I'm listening to podcasts all the time. I was telling Nathan off air that I think there may be 4 episodes I haven't heard from the Bokeh Podcast. So
that's a commitment too, because we are, I've recorded over 300. I think we've released something like 285 or so now. So I don't think I actually thanked you earlier, but thank you so much for making that much time to join us.
No, thank you, because you're providing value. And I think, even if things don't seem to be relatable to you, definitely give them a chance. Listen to different podcasts, because if you come with the expectancy that you're going to get at least one thing out of it, you will. And so I listen to the Bokeh Podcast a lot, and I'm not just saying that because I'm on here, but also I listen to The Gold Digger, She, Cultivate Your Life. I mean, I have a long list because like I said, I'm processing all day in my cubicle and I'm listening to podcasts. But with books, I read books very slowly, very slowly. And that's primarily because of the time allowances I have.
Yeah.
So I will read a lot of times. I'll take my lunch break and I will read as I walk around. So I'll kind of get a little bit of exercise and a little reading in at the same time.
That's cool.
Which is how I do a lot of things in life. I kind of multitask often, but there is a book I've been reading for a long time and I'm still not done, but I'm confident enough to recommend it at this point. And it is called A Million Little Ways. It's by Emily P. Freeman.
Okay.
And she talks about uncovering the art that is within you. It's phenomenal. She is very poetic and she writes very richly with very beautiful descriptions. That's how I enjoy reading. But she talks about how you get in touch with the art that is alive within you. How it isn't necessarily about making something new, but instead you have this uniquely human opportunity to reimagine what already is. Even if it doesn't seem like a lot or not enough, it's one of the million little ways that you can bring light into a dark place. So it's all about art and how to discover what you're passionate about and what's living within you that needs to come out. It's fantastic.
Wow.
That's one. I know you haven't heard that one before.
That's quite the review. That's really awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll link to that in the show notes.
I love that. She's my favorite author. I love the way she writes. So that one's, again, A Million Little Ways. And this is going to sound like a religious plug, but it really isn't. And it's the Bible. It's the most versatile book I have ever read. I mean, it has poetry and letters and stories, songs and prayers and proverbs. I say that it's descriptive and it's prescriptive. So you can read it as something that is describing stories or prescriptively for your life. And I definitely invite listeners to read it. Even if you don't believe it, after all, I mean, you don't really read anything because you already believe it. You read it and then you decide whether you believe it or not. So definitely I would give it a chance. And if you need a place to start, I actually have a blog that outlines some incredible practical business advice that's found in the Bible that you can read through.
Really?
Yep.
How interesting. Okay. Talk to us about your camera bag, something potentially unusual that enables you to be a better photographer. What comes to mind?
Okay. So I have a non-photography related and a photography related.
Okay, cool.
The non-photography is my hair ties. Okay. I have big curly hair. It is normally down. And if at some point my hair does not go up, I cannot be a good photographer. So I feel it when I don't have a hair tie in my bag.
Yeah.
And so it gets in my way. It's hot and humid in Florida almost year long. So that's super important. But for that same reason of that intense humidity in Florida, as you move indoors and outdoors during shoots, something that is really practical and portable is a Sunpack lens pen. It's about $10.
Okay.
And it's excellent. It has like a dual head, and it's just for quickly removing dust and smudges from your lens without damaging the lens. And it's very, very helpful. It has like a brush on one side and sort of like for smudges on the other side. Mm-hmm. And I mean, it's fantastic for me. It's a very practical thing. I always have it with me because as I move in and out of indoor and outdoor spaces, the lens will get smudgy or clouded or whatever, and it saved a lot of shots for me.
Well, that's great. Yeah, no, I think I've had one of those at some point. May even still have one somewhere. But they're relatively simple but quite practical. And I remember, I mean, I'm in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Shot most of my wedding career in the Chattanooga market, and that humidity going in and out of air conditioned buildings into that crazy humidity, and the lens just fogs up immediately. And it can be a little bit frustrating. So having something handy that is clean and that can help you wipe all of that off is
right.
Definitely
and that it
handy.
won't damage your lens, of course. So.
Oh, 100%. Actually, we haven't talked about this a lot on the podcast. Do you use filters? Like, do you have a UV filter on your lens?
I don't actually. Well, my gear is pretty simplistic, either because I'm just starting or because I like it that way. I haven't decided, but I shoot Canon and I love my 50. I have just acquired an 85 and I actually have a 40, and that's about everything I have. I have a Canon 5D Mark III. And that's the extent of my equipment pretty much.
Yeah, simple is so nice. I think, it's fun to play with gear, but at the end of the day, if you just have a few pieces that enable you then focus on the work at hand, I think that's a great way to approach it.
Well, and as long as you're familiar with what you have, it's really helpful because then you can actually make good use of what you have instead of trying to master tons of lenses and tons of different equipment at the same time.
Yeah, it'd be dragging that massive suitcase of gear around and then have to sort through it in order to find what to use next. Yeah, that's interesting. Well, I want to shift the conversation back to our primary focus today, which is this idea of a multifaceted life. And part of the reason I think this is so interesting is, again, because it's so easy to, and I think I may have even kind of gone off on a tangent and didn't get back to my original point earlier, which is as entrepreneurs, as business owners, as photographers, we're trying to, at times, maybe frantically create and run a business. And it's easy to kind of be blinders on, only doing that thing all the time. And it's limiting in some ways because there's so much possibility in life. I've really enjoyed it. And I know I've brought it up a number of times on the podcast now, but in the last 3 years, 4 years or so, 3 years, I guess, I've spent time riding motorcycles. I got my license and started riding, and now I'm going to the racetrack and learning technique, and it's physically challenging and mentally challenging, and it's invigorating, and it's scary as can be as well, and has pushed me outside the box. And this is just one thing that I've tried in the last 10 years that has brought variety and interest and challenge to my life. And I think that we could all stand to do that in some form or fashion a little bit more. There's just so much to life. So it is easy to limit ourselves to kind of a simplistic identity that you say, hey, this is who I am. And we were talking about the idea of a personality type earlier, or even an Enneagram. And I think part of the reason, and this is a conversation in and of itself to be clear, but I think part of the reason that can be kind of simplistic is a lot of times behavioral patterns are labeled a personality type, and somebody says, I'm just this person. And so now they've limited themselves to these behavioral patterns and to these activities, and that's just kind of where the conversation ends. I think there's so many more possibilities. So all that to say, and I know I'm kind of digging into big topics there, but I'd love to get, first of all, just to give context to the conversation, Janioris, for our listeners, just share briefly, if you will, the various degrees that you have, the professions, the activities that you're currently involved in, to give them some context.
Sure. Okay, well, let's see. I'll make this as brief as possible. Well, I mean, I have a psychology and a criminology degree, both bachelor's degrees from the University of Florida. So I'm very invested in what influences our behaviors and our choices, as well as people's personality types like you're talking about. I honestly wish everyone had to take at least one psychology class at some point. Yeah. It doesn't make you perfect at handling human interaction by any means, but it does give you invaluable information to make conclusions about people's motives, their intentions, your own conflict management style, your triggers, how you react or retract, or how you receive affection and attention, or how you best learn or communicate. It's phenomenal. I'm a big fan, even though I don't necessarily apply psychology in a professional way. It definitely has aided me in how I handle my business and in how I handle life. So that's the first part of that. So aside from my photography side hustle, I also have a full-time job at a completely unrelated field, which is I work at a clearing firm for brokers. And I don't know how that happened because I don't even like math. So I am there. And I have been working there for the past 5 years. I also teach theology at a local institute in my town. I'm a life coach for a group of young adults that we do community with. I'm the lead worship singer and vocal coach at my church. I'm a newlywed, which is a whole nother task on its own. And yes. I run a separate music brand alongside my husband. Like we talked about earlier, he is an audio mix engineer. And so I'm involved in his studio productions for other artists within our home. And we're also avid travelers. So we've been close to 20 countries collectively for work, for missions, for vacation. So we are heavily involved people.
Well, to say the least, yeah. But I think that's interesting. I mean, like the person, and I've thought about this for myself. I want to be certainly a good conversationalist. And this is something I'm still working on and have a lot of work to do on. But part of what also makes me as an individual more interesting as a conversationalist. I mean, it starts with showing interest in somebody else, making somebody else feel good. But then there's an element too of, at least in my experience, when I engage with somebody who has I guess an interesting life, and that they are doing or have done a wide variety of things that they can speak to their experiences from, that in and of itself just makes them a more interesting person to engage with, to hang out with, because they've probably seen and done and ultimately, hopefully, learned a lot. But on your site, you say something interesting, which is, and this is in the bio section of your website, you say, I love the unpredictability of jazz. Now, jazz is not a type of music that, in fact, I was even naturally drawn to, at least a lot of it, because it gets highly technical. It's not, it goes outside your typical chord progressions that you expect to hear next in, most pop music these days. And we find as human beings comfort in predictability, knowing what's next. That idea of enjoying unpredictability, is this something that kind of spans across your life? Is it something that you've always loved? What's encouraged this for you?
This question is really making me think. But I will tell you that, like you're saying, it's a very technical genre, but in high quality productions of jazz, these experienced, highly skilled musicians are usually playing live, and they riff off of each other constantly.
Yeah.
It's the only genre of music, I would venture to say, maybe I'm wrong, but it's the only genre of music where players are encouraged to sort of color outside the lines.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So there's a quote that I love by Miles Davis, the famous jazz trumpeter. He said, when you hit a wrong note, it's the next note that makes it good or bad. Right.
Oh, so true.
Yeah. So with jazz, if you hit a wrong note, they just sort of riff off of that and go somewhere else with it. And so mistakes are not really mistakes. They're just interpretations. And what you do with your next move after an unplanned note is very defining. So it makes the music incredibly interesting. It's very enjoyable. And as a person who struggles with perfectionism, there's a healing feeling that comes from embracing perfectly imperfect music, jazz.
Mm-hmm. So would you say then that kind of translates across your life? Because I noticed that, and maybe I was reading into it too much, but the idea of enjoying the unpredictability of jazz means that you're okay with the idea that things aren't going to go as expected. And if we're to break outside of this kind of small box that we live in a lot of times as photographers and entrepreneurs, and kind of go beyond that and challenge ourselves with other hobbies or potentially other professions, and develop a more interesting life in that way, it takes being okay with unpredictability. Have you seen this in other elements of your life?
Absolutely. It gives you, I think jazz gives me permission to see something that was unpredictable and still came out beautiful. And it came out okay. So I think that when I listen to jazz, it's a reminder to myself that when things don't go as expected, or they, like you say, follow a different chord progression than I had planned originally, it can still come out beautiful and enjoyable. So I think that that's sort of a safe haven for me, to almost like when you see someone that has done something before you and it gives you permission to say, it's been done, it can happen with me too. I think that jazz gives me permission to say, if I'm enjoying this, I can enjoy my life even if it doesn't go quite as planned.
That's good. And was that something that your parents instilled in you growing up? Was it something that you just kind of learned on your own?
Well, my mom is a singer. My brother is a drummer, and my husband, like I said, plays piano. So I've been surrounded by music a lot. So the element of music itself, we have just found ourselves as old souls digging into jazz.
Yeah.
But the element of things not going quite as planned, I think you can find in any corner of life. So
no question.
if you've been living long enough, you know that things are not always going to go as planned. And it's all about the perspective with which you enter it.
Yes.
For our honeymoon, which was just a year ago, everything went haywire. I mean, everything. The day we were supposed to leave, there was a blizzard and we missed our flights. We were sort of trying to reinvent our whole hunt. We were supposed to go to Italy, and it was starting to look bleak at the idea of getting to Italy.
Yeah.
And we just started to plan alternatives, to look for other places to stay. And it was all about perspective. Mind you, we were on cloud 9 after the wedding. But I think that if you approach it that way, there will always be an alternative. You can always enjoy what's happening, and nothing has enough power over you to knock you over if you accept the reality that there are things you don't know about tomorrow, and that you are able to, like Miles Davis says, take the next note after the wrong note and make it something else. So we did end up going to Italy though.
Well, it seems like a win-win, but you're right. It's all about perspective,
Right.
and how we frame that thing. I've mentioned this before, but I have a tattoo on my left arm that is the Japanese word kakushin, which is believe or belief. And Tony Robbins talks about the significance of what we believe about something, and ultimately how we frame it. And it is all about what we make of it in the end. And that's just a really great reminder, but it enables us to be able to flex and to flow and to go outside our comfort zone and to try new things. And again, it can make for a really, really interesting life if we're open to that approach. And I think that's really cool. But one of the caveats here and questions that I have is about time. And we talked about this briefly earlier, but how do you make time for all of these things and not get absolutely worn down or burnt out in the process?
I have to start by saying that I haven't been perfect at this, like everything else, and that I have had times of depletion, that I have had times of burnout. And it's important for me to admit that, because I don't want to steer anyone into a life of being overly committed or taking on too much and get to that point. So I have had ebbs and flows of different involvements and commitments throughout my life. And I think I've come across or have narrowed it down now to 3 considerations when I decide whether I should invest my time or energy into any endeavor.
Interesting.
The first one is your personality type. So it takes a very proactive and consistent level of self-awareness and inner dialogue to gauge whether something is fitting to your personality to be heavily involved or not. So to be asking yourself questions like, is this making you feel invigorated or drained? Does it feel like you're the best version of yourself when you're doing this, or you're becoming the best version of yourself when you engage in this activity? Are you doing this because you feel pressure to engage, or does this line up with your personal goals? So the first consideration when it comes to having time for it is this even fitting to my personality and to my general goals? The second thing I would consider when it comes to involving yourself is your priorities, like I said, in your value set. So I always feel strange placing people or things in order in my life because I tend to feel guilty, but I've learned the importance of being honest with yourself about your priorities. What's important to you in this season. I use Power Sheets by Laura Casey, the Cultivate What Matters brand. And she does an excellent job of steering you in the right direction as you set your goals for your year, of really having that inner conversation with yourself about what your priorities are for this year and what your priorities are for this season. So the third thing is just that, is your season. So your priorities don't have to be final to everything. There's a season, there's a time for everything. And so I think when you consider having time for it, you need to consider what season you're in. So you can produce all year long, but there has to be a rhythm of differing pace. So it's similar to nature. I know that that's not the popular way we consider seasons, but there are actually many fruits that are resilient and they can withstand the cold climate and even thrive in it depending on where they're being grown. So there are different fruits that can be grown at different times of the year. So similarly, there are times where I can consider, okay, is this a fruit that is going to be resilient and withstand a cold climate and thrive in it in my life in this very season? Is there room for this given my values or my priorities right now? And is this really, am I feeling pressure to engage with this? Or is this aligned with something that makes me feel invigorated instead of drained?
Wow, I love that. And it's nice to have the idea of values in particular just really resonates with me because I think this is so important. I've seen the value of having values in my life as well. Having kind of a North Star, a set of goals within my life, or not even goals, but values, these ideals to live for, and let that kind of guide how I spend time, what I do, how I engage with people. And then the self-awareness piece is, again, a loaded conversation. I know we've alluded to it a couple of times in this conversation too. The idea of a season for everything is interesting because I think this goes for me back to maybe being a perfectionist, and I feel like I need to be consistent all the time, exactly the same. And the reality is that may not actually work for the time being. And I do have to be open to flexing and flowing with what's going on at the moment. That's a really interesting point of conversation. But I want to make this even more practical though for our listeners too, and wonder if you can share with our listeners how maybe some simple ways that they can go about adding a little bit more variety to their lives. They understand the significance of variety. We've talked about that. They understand how to manage their time effectively if they're going to add other elements to their life. But how can they actually go about adding that additional variety?
Perfect. Well, there's actually, there's a quote that's been going around. Perhaps your listeners have heard it, but they say find a hobby that makes you money, one that keeps you fit, and one that promotes your creativity. So, I think if you're a listener and you have feel like you are narrowed in on, I think that's actually one of the reasons why, if I could riff off on this a little bit, is one of the reasons why people have such a hard time finding a brand position. The reason why photographers are stuck talking about their favorite food or other basic facts is because in order to create a brand that shapes your business, you need to be secure in the things that you are rather than having your business shape you, is that you can shape your business. And find places where you can have relatability with people and expand your networks even for client opportunities or having transferable skills. So I think that if you were to just want a starting place for finding other things outside of your business, even just for your sanity, because just immersing ourselves in all the topics available and techniques available for your business, it will drive you crazy. So if you just want to start with a hobby that makes you money outside of your business, one that keeps you fit, and one that promotes your creativity, I think it would give you a good sense of wholeness. I think one way to really figure out what those hobbies could be, you might think to yourself, a wedding photographer is making money and being fit and being creative on a wedding.
Hopefully,
so,
yeah.
From all the running around for all those hours, I imagine they're also being fit. But if you think outside of the box, if you sort of use the 3 A's, I call them the 3 A's to sort of distinguish how to choose something to be involved with, it's ability, affinity, and affirmation. So your ability is what you're really skilled at, the things that come easily or naturally to you. You mix that in with affinity, or the things that you are passionate about, to borrow a cliche word, or that light you up, things that get you excited, make you feel full when you take part in them. And then the third part of that is affirmation. So what do people call out in you? What do the people closest to you or even strangers have to say about where you shine? And if you mix those 3 things, you will be able to find a hobby that you are skilled at, or at least comes slightly natural to you, that you have an affinity for, or that it makes you feel full when you take part in it, and that people affirm you in, or that make you say, or that that can say, hey, I see you shine when you do this. And I think that's a really good qualifier to find hobbies that you can be invested in that won't drain you from the attention your business needs, but still create some variety in your life.
And I love the alliteration too, hearkening back to being a minister's kid. That's pretty great. Where did you learn these principles, though? I mean, are these that you've learned from other people, or ideas, principles you've kind of developed on your own?
Well, the hobbies is definitely, I have no idea where the originator of the quote is anymore. The one that says that makes you money, keeps you fit, and promotes creativity. But the 3 A's, I heard those actually recently from a workshop by J.D. Greer. He's a minister as well. Of course, a lot of what I consume is ministry related, but he just talks about how to find your purpose by using those as qualifiers. So I have accommodated that to my life as well. And I think it's excellent because it helps you center in. I mean, there are so many things available. The plethora of information and things that you can be involved with could actually overwhelm you to the point of inaction.
Yes.
So if you use those qualifiers to help you find something, it might even help you find passive income. It might even help you find a new exercise or a new thing that, and again, these are transferable skills. So I work in a brokerage firm, and one time I didn't feel well, and all of a sudden they called these 2 folks that, they work in cubicles beside me. I had no idea. One of them had a background in the FBI. The other one was a paramedic in the military, and they were helping me out. And you would have never known, but those involvements in other areas are actually transferable skills that you never know when you could use them in opportunities with clients, or in how you engage with other people, or the networks that you have. So it's definitely important to find something that merges all those things.
Well, and that's a great segue actually to my last question. I'm just curious, some might say, well, what's the purpose of doing all of these other things? How is it going to actually benefit my business? The context of this podcast, which is about running a photography business. So how have you seen this varying life? How has that affected what you've done as a photographer? If you could sum it up.
I think it's honestly one of the main reasons why I've been able to propel quickly in this last year is the fact that I engage with people outside of what could be a potential client network. And with my conversations and my relationships with them, they have been able to, that part about having people trust you, or the know, like, and trust factor, I've almost been able to skip that laborious effort because these people are already in relationship with me. I'm already expanded into different networks. So these people already know me, they already like me, and they already trust me. And this is just added bonus to our relationship, the fact that I also do photography. There are certain levels of relatability even with people that are not in my networks, but they get to know me first as a photographer. I'm able to relate with them and figure out their stories, or relate with them and have conversations with them in a way that is useful to transfer onto their photography or onto their session, because they relate with me on a different level because of what I do to work out, or because of what I do, in my free time, or because of my music, or because of whatever. So essentially it has helped expand my brand position to where I no longer compete on the same terms as other photographers, because I have a leg up on other people who only have their skill to show for. Wow.
Well, I think that's a wonderful way to sum up our conversation. I really appreciate you sharing both your experience and advice, these lessons that you've learned. And Janioris, can you just briefly share one more time for our listeners where they can follow you online, your brand, social media, your website, et cetera?
Absolutely. And Nathan, I just want to take advantage to thank you for this incredible opportunity and to give me the chance to create value or add value to a community I've been gleaning from for so long. So this was an excellent conversation, and I appreciate that.
Oh, myself included. It's truly our privilege.
So you can find me at janioris.com. So again, that's JANIORIS. And I purposely have it as janioris.com. Now you get some context as to why it's not associated to a photography or anything, because there's a lot of things to my name. So it's just a general site where I have my personal brand with all kinds of different things on there. But janioris.com is my website. You can also find me on Instagram at janiorisdr. So my first name again, and then DR is for my last names, or you could consider it as Janioris. I don't know. That's not a thing I do, at least not yet, right? Not a doctor. And on Facebook, I'm at Janioris Photography, or you can find our music with my husband and I at J&H Duo.
Wow. Awesome. Okay. Well, we'll link to all of these in the show notes. For those of you listening in, make sure you take advantage of those show notes. It's at Bokeh, Bokeh podcast.com. You can see the show notes there, or if you have a great podcast player that lets you kind of scroll through the show notes, check them out there. You can link to the various resources that we discussed, see the talking points, and definitely take advantage of those. Thank you once again, Janioris, for making time for the Bokeh Podcast.
Thank you, Nathan. It was my distinct privilege.
Thank you so much for listening to the Bokeh Podcast. Will you let us know what you thought by leaving a review of the podcast in the Apple Podcast app? And I'd love to hear from you personally with your thoughts about the podcast and suggestions about future topics and guests for the show. My email is nathan@photographersedit.com. The Bokeh Podcast is brought to you by Milu, the simplest way for photographers and coordinators to collaborate on shot lists and timelines for weddings, parties, and other amazing events. Visit Milu, MIILU.com. This podcast is also brought to you by Photographer's Edit, custom image editing for the professional photographer. Visit photographersedit.com.